Thanks very much, everyone. You know, Woody Allen once said that 90% of life is turning up. I think turning up for the second last session or third last session after a two-day conference is probably the other 10%, so well done. We'll try to make this as interesting as possible as we dive into social licence issues. This is really great. Thanks, Dane. That was a really interesting way to start to talk about what I want to talk about, actually, because this is really about the 80% of people. Now, what I'm going to talk about is how the forest industries of Australia are dealing with our social licence issues. We have one or two social licence issues in forest industries in Australia. I'm going to be talking about our world, and some of it will be analogous for you and some of it won't, but hopefully some of the things we're doing you might be able to learn from. I've certainly learned a lot from the last couple of days. So we'll dive into it. This is where we come from. So this is our building in Canberra. I'm from Canberra. We operate in Canberra. In fact, actually, I've got this heavy coat on. This is my only sort of coat. The taxi driver said to me this morning, he said, "Oh, well, you're not from around here, are you, wearing a coat like that?" And I said, no, I'm from Canberra. He said, "Yeah, you can always tell a Canberran." I said, "Oh, can you?" He said, "You just can't tell them very much," which I thought, being in the Northern Territory, was very appropriate. Apologies to federal colleagues who are here. What do we do there? Well, we try to look after the forest products industries of Australia. That's pulp and paper making, that's sawmilling, that's hardwood, softwood, the whole shoot and match. But what's interesting, I think, for today is that 3 or 4 years ago we sat down with our mission statement and had another look at it, and we added something in. You can probably see what we've added in there, the second red part, because quite clearly in industries like ours, and we operate in the same operating environment, our industries, if we don't get that second part right, and this is what Dane was really advising us just a minute ago, forget about the first bit. The reason we have this challenge is obvious, because you and I know very well to get that, from that, we go via that. And in our case, for those of you who haven't spent a lot of time in our industry, I'll tell you a little bit about it now. You get hardwood, you've got beautiful papers of all sorts, obviously framing for our houses, softwoods of various types. That all comes through this sort of process as well. This is what a German academic once called the abattoir syndrome. You've probably heard of that, and lots of discussion in our world in our combined worlds about how we don't want to take people into the abattoir. Well, this is the forest industry's abattoir. I'll just say in passing, because you've got some very impressive machinery here. Next conference, I'm going to try to do what you've got here on the wings, but this is, for those of you who don't know how this works, this is how we actually harvest trees, hardwood and softwood. That large machine grips the tree at the base, and the chainsaw comes out, as you can see at the bottom. They take the tree off, it falls over, and then it's quite magical to see how it moves along, and they choose the right length to cut. It's being fed information from the mill and from the customers and all sorts of things to make really good decisions about the maximum optimising the wood that comes through. But anyway, back to the slaughterhouse. This is the slaughterhouse. This is what it looks like in our industry. We can't get away from that. This is actually in New Zealand. A lot of my members are in New Zealand as well. This is what it looks like. I wanted to put this in too, because while I'm very impressed by the road trains here, none of you are shooting for the moon like we do. That's actually disgorging wood chips down at Portland Port down in Victoria, and they're wood chips in the background. So this is what our industry looks like. The other part of the operating environment, which is so similar to what you all do, is we can have a big switch turn which dramatically shifts what we do. We won't go back into 2011, you all know about that. You probably also know about some of the things that have happened to us. The most high profile one, of course, is that doesn't exist. If you don't know what that is an artist's impression of a $2 billion pulp mill that was going to be built in the northern parts of Tasmania by the Guns Group. Pulp's a bad word, isn't it? If Dane was still up here, he'd be saying to us, when are you people going to reclaim the language and call what you do something nice? So pulp is what we do to create paper, or to create the constituent parts of paper. Wood chips go into that. But instead of going into that, which is actually a precinct in Tasmania where there's also an aluminium smelter, but we managed to lose the battle to build that. We now just have a very, very large car park, or drive-in cinema if anyone's looking for a new business opportunity in Tasmania. Very large spot there for you. And instead of that, we're shipping all those wood chips that we would have elaborately transformed into high-value products in Australia. Sound familiar? Something governments like to say that we should do? We would have done it there. We're not doing it there. We're shipping them to China. And here's an even more profound example to my way of thinking of when we get it wrong, what happens. Does anyone know what that's a picture of? Anyone here from Tasmania? You wouldn't be, of course. You're in Northern Australia. But visited Tasmania? You know, it's the Triabunna port. What's important about the Triabunna port in Tasmania? Triabunna is the only deepwater port accessible to the industry in the whole of the southern part of Tasmania. Do you know what happens at that port now? They weave baskets and make little lapel pouches out of leather, because this has been bought by a couple of green activists and closed to the industry. So we've got 600,000 hectares of forestry, of assets, which are now effectively stranded in the southern part of Tasmania. They're being shipped at the moment to northern Tasmania. It costs about $10 million extra by the state each year. It's not sustainable. Tasmania is only 10% of what we do, by the way, nationally. Our industry is pretty big right across Australia, but these are the two most profound examples, if you like, I wanted to throw up there to say, like your Four Corners program, why this part of the two-day conference matters so much and why I spend so much time as CEO on it, and why we're trying to address our messaging and also the way that we are messaging. Because this is the core of our problem. I mean, the really profound and somewhat demoralising truth of what I want to talk to you about today is that SGAS and the Australian standard that I heard about, ALEG, and our various, the standard Dame was just talking about to the feedlotters, our standards, we've got a couple. Oh, by the way, on that standard, if you go down the path of allowing a green group to develop a standard to apply to your industry, my counsel would be make sure you have another standard at play as well, because if you are only in the hands of the green groups in this respect, the standard may start reasonable, it may not end up reasonable. We have two standards, both internationally accepted in forestry, the Green Group's standard of Forestry Stewardship Council and the PEFC, a global standard which manifests itself in Australia as the AFS. These two standards apply across Australia. They're both scientific, and we have all our members, many of our members use both, some use one or the other. It's just a side note. But the sad truth, I was coming to the sad truth, a really important moment. The sad truth is that despite the standards, despite SCAS, you will not be able to persuade these people. These people here have put up a sign. They've walked a long way into some bush to say this is what state government managed environment looks like, and clearly from the red on the sign this is supposed to be a damning statement. Unfortunately for me, that's actually really well managed forest. That's actually what really high quality state managed environment does look like, because in the end, to get the things we want from forests, and by the way, in case you don't know about forestry, what they do with native forest operations is they don't go and pick out a single tree and walk out with it. It doesn't work. They tend to go and collect all the seeds over a couple of seasons, put them into a seed bank, and then they clear a particular area. They usually put a fire through as well to create a nice ash bed because the seeds like that. Then they re-sow with the same species, and it grows up. Within 20 or 30 years, you wouldn't even know that it had been harvested or felled. But the challenge we've all got in this room is that to get the things we want from timber, we have to harvest. And to get to the meat, you've got to go through a process of killing animals. This is not something we're going to ever be able to change. And we can't just keep on trying to address this the same way we have before. You might have seen this sequence before. It comes from Scotland. And this is a good way, I think, to try to remember that just doing the same thing and thinking it's going to make a difference isn't going to work. That's what Einstein actually said. You might recall he has a famous quote. He said, doing the same thing over again and expecting a different result is actually a definition of madness. So what we've been doing in forestry is trying to have a new look at our operating environment. We wanted to look at who is the audience we're talking to and do some research and get some science underneath this. What are they valuing in 2015? And therefore, is that actually impacting on what we do? Is this making a difference, or do we do that work and just keep on going the same way as those cranes falling off the harbour in Skye in Scotland? This is the challenging information for us in the room. This is your audience. These people are who you're trying to talk to. And it's even worse. It's actually not them, it's them. They're the real audience. I trust you know who these folks are. These are some of the characters off James Cameron's 2009 film called Avatar. This is the highest grossing film ever in the history of the universe by a quantum leap. And as you'll probably know, if you don't know, I'll remind you, the story of this film was there was a pristine planet inhabited by these Pandoran folk, and they lived in harmony with nature. They certainly had no live cattle trade, and they didn't do any forestry. The leather that they were wearing, I presume they got only from animals that had died peacefully in the night somewhere. But that was their world, and the rapacious mining company came to try to extract more minerals, and of course they shoot down the big tree and they go to war, and in the end the Pandorans win. But the point that you have to take seriously about all this is what that film made, $2.7 billion. I mean, there's no one who hasn't seen this film. And as James Cameron said when talking about this film later, he said, I really wanted to change our whole relationship with the planet and how we use it. And I think he's had some effect there. I think that this is the new operating environment that we're in, and you've got to keep on thinking, what is our messaging then into this environment? This is a world where our children have a completely different understanding of nature and of wildlife and of our intersect with it than we did, certainly than our parents did, but even than we did. This is a world where fish go looking for their fathers. This is that Nemo film that was so popular. And not only do rats have great family life, but they actually are so clean that they become cordon bleu chefs in Paris. This is Ratatouille, another one of those films. These drive me crazy, these films. I try to ban them from my house, but my kids get around me. They always seem to see them. You know it from the surveys that you see. Every time we have a royal show in Sydney, someone does a survey about how disconnected people are, and they have a laugh that the kids all think that cotton socks come from sheep and yogurt grows on trees. It's always done as a bit of a chuckle in the newspapers. I think it's really, really serious, because it allows this misrepresentation to take place all the time. This is on the ABC's website at the moment, and if you take... I was involved in a story about renewable energy credits for using offcuts out of eucalyptus sawmills, basically. But the ABC published, because they would like to, before and after shot of the forest before, and you see it on the green forest, and after on the left, and you could slide the middle part across and get a completely green or a completely Armageddon sort of forest. And you all in this room understand that that's not a complete story of the industry, but that's the operating environment that we're in. And your operating environment is the same. We have, when I was having a look online, before coming to talk to you, I noticed that there's quite a lot of material that says that cows cry emotional tears, and there's quite a lot of material on that apparently proving it, and I don't think that's actually the case. I'll be corrected by anyone if I'm wrong about that, but that's the space that is being played for you as well. So what have we done about it? Again, this is about us, and maybe you can take from it what you will in your own environment, but this is where we've gone with it. We first of all tried to work out if they're the people we're trying to talk to these days, those folks with the iPhones doing the selfies, what do they actually value? What do they believe anymore? And so Pollinate's a great company that does this sort of work, and I'm indebted to our research and development organisation, FWPA, for doing this for us. They discovered in doing some research that people love forests. They see forests basically as good and desirable, and what they particularly like are these emotionally based values that come from forests. They like the fact that they're clean and they feel nice. They've got beauty and aromas and all sorts of kind of emotional values. What they also found was this strange result that's internally conflicted. They think it's okay to cut down a tree as long as they're replaced, but they also, I won't slow down, I know we're a bit over time, I won't go through all of that, but this is really was unpicking this strange contradiction we have in our industry, that they think that it's okay as long as you replace the tree, but they actually don't think we should cut down a tree, it's bad for the environment. And the really hard bit to deal with, and this is probably analogous to what I'd say for your industry too, I imagine 80% of Australians love a steak or love a lamb roast. Everyone loves wood. So we've got a community out there that's quite happy to love wood, but at best is incredibly ambivalent about the idea you might have to go through a tree to get to that wood. Tricky. What do we come out with? The conclusion that we come is that putting forest and wood together, they draw a logical conclusion: we need trees and we need wood. So you can't have both. So our conclusion from our consultant was, you need a new narrative about sustainable forest resources. Our old narrative was this one. This was really what we started with 4 or 5 years ago, was an idea that it was all about the heritage, if you like. So we did some research on that, and we found that actually, yes, we do get the occasional star for the heritage side of our argument. There are some people who think that's still pretty valuable, not nearly as many as we had thought. We thought what we did was very valuable, and they sort of gave us 1 star. But here's what's interesting, and I think this applies equally to your industries. Where we started to get the stars was in things that weren't specific to do with our industry, but more to do with the place we played in Australia as a whole. Regional job creation was ranked quite highly, and most interestingly, they really liked the fact that they really like regional and rural towns to exist. These are these groups that we had survey. They love the idea that Australia's not just capital cities, even though they all live in the capital cities. But they don't want to live in those regional towns. So they were quite pleased that we did like living in those regional towns. It's interesting, isn't it? So we got many more marks for these things that we'd never really woven into our stories before. We didn't realise these things were important. It's just where we operate. We operate all around Australia, mostly in regional communities. And what didn't we get marks for? Well, sadly, they were the things that we mostly had been putting all of our eggs in these baskets. You know, in the past we basically had a sense of entitlement about our place in the Australian culture because of the pioneering work we did. I mean, these sort of timber bridges are why we had a timber industry in Australia in the first place. 150 years ago, it was all about opening up the country and doing it in these wonderful constructions. Building the nation, hard but honourable work. These things just didn't fly. They were considered table stakes. Now, we're coming to the most important slide of your life. If you're in a business, this is a slide that you must not forget, and it'll be on the deck somewhere, and you can have a good look at it online and work out how it applies to you. But it really is important as we think about this idea of social licence. It comes from the work of this guy, Jeff Moore, out of the US. So you usually pay thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars to go to Harvard to study this sort of stuff. You're going to get it in 2 minutes from me for free. This slide. It's the only hard slide in the deck, but just work with me on it because it's really important, because we've heard a lot about what we could do better, and I know Dane kept saying, you guys have got to do better, you guys and girls have got to do better, but how do you do that without just doing a whole lot of random acts of kindness? You know, those awful bumper stickers that we used to see in purple, magic happens, they just drive me crazy. That's not rational business decision making. This is. So what we've done at AFBA is try to overlay this into our understanding of who our audience is now and what are their values. Core and context. We're just going to stay above the blue line in the mission critical zone. This is all about what are the things that drive customers to you or away from you. And it applies right across. Every person in this room will have a business or an operation or a department that needs to understand this. Because core is any process in your operation that is going to bring you extra customers. Context is just stuff, if you get wrong, people kill you. But if you get right, they think, well, you should be doing that anyway. Now, in my view, this is my challenging moment for you, I think SGAS and I think our standards, we've got a couple of standards that we have to run, I think they're in context. I think they're table stakes. I'm not sure that's going to win us the overall argument in the longer run. That's where core comes in. Now, the really hard part for companies is to understand this, because quite often context is where all your money's being made. And it's very hard. The research in this, and it's quite a lot online if you want to dig into it, says that companies die because they get stuck funding context. They put all their resources into context because that's where they're making money. It's a big machine, and they forget about core. So the Tiger Woods story, of course, most of his money would have been coming from that estate of shoes and caps and golf clubs and so on. And how do you reckon those golf clubs are going now in terms of their sales? Another really good example people use, of course, is Kodak. And Kodak clearly, at some stage in its history, confused what was core and what was context. In an elevator pitch, if you were an executive Kodak saying 25 years ago what you did as a pickup line at a party, you probably said, I look after Kodachrome 200. We make millions of rolls of it. That's not what he should have said. Mind you, what I'm about to say, he might not have actually ended up with a good result in terms of a pickup line, but he should have said, I'm in the business of a sustainable, efficient operation that captures memories and turns them into something you can store. Because that's really what they were doing. And if that had been clear to them, then they may be with us today. The other picture I wanted to share with you, because these help you get this core context idea clear in your head, that's a picture of Cisco Systems, a big company I know really well from Silicon Valley. Cisco invented the multi-protocol router, which joined together the internets of the world at that time. When they did it, they were the only people who did it, so it's quite clearly core. But is it core for Cisco now when Chinese are making similar routers that are about half the price? I don't think so. So what is core for Cisco? Security. But security is still only 1% of the dollars that they make. Do you understand? The router business is sustaining their operations. But unless they can persuade the world that the future is all about not just routing, that's now table stakes, it's about secure routing, keeping your data safe, then they're not going to have a business in the future. What is it for us? There's us at Forestry and there's you folks at the bottom. What is core and context for you? I'm not going to answer it for me. I'll show you a video in a minute which I think will help you understand where we think our core and context is. But it's something to think about, I think, for you. So as I said at the beginning, it was really important that we diagnosed our situation before we moved to prescription. This was our prescription. This is where we ended up after doing quite a lot of work. We decided we need a new approach for a new audience with a new values hierarchy. It's been talked a bit about today. Have you got my Twitter photo, Alison? Have you done that? See, we're tweeting already. This is, I'm told, I've hired a young communications person. I get into enormous trouble if I don't send photos. So thank you. Done. So new messages and new mediums as well. A new narrative about the sustainable industries, but again, talking to them in their values and a new assessment of what's core and context. And now I should link it back to the starting question that Alison gave me. So what about social licence? Are our people, you and your workforces, are we the key? Well, they are our people in the field. They are the people who interface daily with, in our particular case, regional newspapers and radio, terribly important for us. How do we use them? You've got 10, 15,000, I think, around. But, I mean, if we extended your chain through to your markets, it's millions. And, of course, forest industries are larger in terms of numbers. There's about 120,000 of them around Australia. But they don't know. They're still, in my experience, they're still telling the stories of yesteryear. So are our people the key? Yes, but only if we give them the right glasses to look through. This is a forester. That's not really. But this is our new PPE for our forest industries. I've got a pair of those glasses. So this is part of the story, is trying to reframe, the story and help our people see. So how do we help our people see? Well, we've got to help them talk to their communities and the values their communities understand. This is from Richard Colbeck, who used to look after our industries, as you know. I put this in really just to help make the second slide more acceptable. This is America, but this is the old story that was in our foyer 3 or 4 years ago. As you walk into the AFPA office, that building I showed you at the beginning, this is what you'd see right in front of you. Now, I'm very proud actually of these pioneers and what they did, but in 2015, based on what we had learned, was this the right picture to have in our foyer as we have these visitors coming through for meetings? And we decided probably not, and we've moved that to another part of the building, and this is what's in our foyer now, because these are the values that the community now wants to hear from us. So it's more than a designer chair, it's a way you can tackle climate change. Wood stores carbon for life. In fact, it's 50% carbon, by the way. We also have gone to the trouble, and that's Senator Jackie Lambie, who's been a big supporter in terms of understanding this new story writing. She helped us launch this carbon cycle, a bike made of wood, carbon cycle. Good gag, right? She launched that and rode around Parliament House for us, and I ride this thing to any media interviews I do in Canberra because it mostly forces the journalists to at least start to have a think about a new story to do with forest industries, not the same old one. The new values hierarchy that we're getting marks for is this one. Bushfire control, especially around these months, so I've done quite a lot of radio lately on that. Multi-use bush access, year-round jobs in the country, as I mentioned. Ecosystem services is our way, is what the world talks about when they want to talk about storing carbon for communities, allowing water systems to be pure, carbon storage and sustainable best practice. These are the pictures that go with that story. These are the sort of things we show now. You don't find the slaughterhouse in my slide set anymore. It was in the past. Even when it comes to Kleenex tissues, Kimberly Clark's a member of AFPA, and they're looking after orangutan habitat in Borneo. So all of these things are part of our new narrative. Oh, that's the wrong video, so we'll get out of that one. So could we just roll that NIMBY video? So this I hope you'll see in the video some of the ways we're trying to do that now.
NIMBY, NIMBY. That's an acronym that we all know very well, isn't it? NIMBYism, not in my backyard. If we usually use it when there might be some development or resource extraction or something might take place. We may not mind it in principle, but we really aren't thrilled about it being too close to home. I want to talk to you for a couple of minutes about the Australian forest industries, and I've got an idea. I want to see if you'd join me in agreeing that we need to take the N out of NIMBY. We need more forestry in our own backyard. Do you know that the United Nations says that by 2050, there's going to be 9.5 billion people on planet Earth, 9.5 billion. There's going to be some big challenges with that. WWF and a whole lot of others are saying that at the rate that we're consuming resources, when we're trying to clothe and house and feed 9.5 billion people, we're going to need 3 planet Earths to do it. Well, that obviously doesn't work out, does it? Where are the answers? Well, surely at least some of the answer has to be in the world using more of those resources which are truly sustainable and renewable. And forestry has to be a big part of that answer. But here's the thing, not forestry everywhere, which is why I wanted to bring you here today. There's something very special taking place here today, and it's got to do with these. Rebecca, thanks. Here's another box of seedlings.
Thanks, Ross.
You see, right across Australia in the winter months, this takes place. What they're doing here is re-sowing, replanting small trees after a harvesting operation has taken place. So the ground's been prepared, the little trees are going in, and over the next 10, 15, 20 years, they'll regrow and they'll be another forest. And it's not just these sort of trees. In the places where we harvest our natural regrowing forest, they carefully prepare the ground there too, and they re-sow and reseed, and again we get regrowth happening. So Australian forest industries really are the definition of sustainable resource use. So how are we doing when it comes to that global challenge of the fibre challenge of the world? How much timber and how much fibre products are we contributing? Not as much as you might think. We only contribute about 2% globally. It's my view that we can do a whole lot more. I think it's got to be the same view if you have a global environmental outlook. If you care about the planet, and if you care about where those massive resource needs are going to come from, then surely you should be able to join with me and say we need to do more of this sustainable industry in the places where it's best managed and where we know that the trees are going in after they're being harvested. So, as I said at the beginning, let's start to say, when it comes to forestry, more in our own backyard, more in my backyard.
Hopefully, thanks folks, hopefully that wasn't too obtuse for you to see how we've been trying to, that wasn't random, as you can imagine, that we worked a lot on that script to try to capture the people we were talking to, the values that they would hear, talking to them in the language that they were using, and using this core context idea. I mean, you can probably tell what we think is core and what we think is going to be context now. This core idea for us in 2015 is the world needs, there's 9.5 billion people by 2050. We need 3 planet Earths. We're going to only get there with fibre, and what you do as well. And you want it done where it's most sustainably done and where we replant, because remember, we had research that said people like the replanting idea, they like the tree growing. Or do you want it done basically by implication? Do you want it done places where they don't replant? Now, it's a work in progress. You'll have to invite me back in a couple of years, Alison. I'll tell you whether it's working. But that was where we're going, and that's not my car, but I think it's probably the greenest car in the world. Thanks very much.
Thank you. So, do we have any questions for Ross? Any questions? Okay, yes, Terry.
Terry Knight, Live Corp. How long has this campaign been running, and have you plotted any trend or shift in attitude since you've been running? You know, you've got rid of the killing floor out of it.
The only it's too soon really to know if we're going to get the results we want. So it's really only been a year since we did our diagnostic work to move into this campaign. But look, anecdotally, I think it's working. We certainly have far less combative engagements than we have had in the past. There's a real, I don't know, a softening, I suppose, of our operating environment in terms of media. The social media seems to be, we're engaged in conversations at a social media level that we weren't before, and that seems to be working as well. So, to be honest, though, I'd really need to come back to you to make sure we weren't on the wrong track. But that's our observation at the moment.
Okay, yeah.
Ross, very enjoyable. Can you comment on in this process? Can you comment on the changes within your industry and within your organisation? It looks like you've gone through a bit of internal change in your own values, and you've had to have some internal discussions.
Yeah, that's why it's taken quite a while. You're quite right. It's a tricky path to navigate because there's nothing wrong with the heritage photos that we took off the wall of in the foyer of the AFBA office, and you know, for the people who put those up 30 years ago, me doing that was somewhat confronting. So it was a case of having to take it a little bit slowly and explain that we weren't jettisoning a belief in this great past, but it was about talking to our communities in the words that they would understand in 2015. I think a breakthrough moment for us was at a board meeting where I said, look, you know, every election we are the most controversial item on the table. How about an election where we're not mentioned? How about an election where we're not controversial at all? Would that be a good thing for business? And everyone thought that would be very good for business because our dials, I mean, we've had the 2011 experience for you folk, but you know, our dials are tweaked in all sorts of ways that are just unimaginable. Can you imagine if you're operating, I'm not sure what you do, sir, but if you suddenly get told after getting ready to stock 20,000 head, we're suddenly going to only allow you to stock 10,000. That's what happens to the forest industries of Australia all the time. Things get turned and suddenly areas are off limits. So yeah, it's been a cultural shift in the organisation, and I've sometimes likened it to my jobs wheeling a wheelbarrow full of rabbits from one door to the next room, and you've got to go slowly and put rabbits back in occasionally, but you can get there, and it is a very worthwhile thing. And now that we're getting some runs on the board, it's a lot more acceptance of it. I'm not sacked yet. Yeah.
Michael Finucane from Meat and Livestock Australia. I'm just going to ask how you differentiate, the Australian sustainable story versus other countries that are maybe supplying timber into Australia that aren't sustainable? How do you deflect bad news from other countries?
Well, because we are a domestic industry, we don't actually mind too much bad news from other countries. It actually makes us look good, and in some ways you've gone to the heart of what I think and what we've decided one of our key messages in core is. The core of our value proposition isn't that we create timber products. The core is that we plant trees after we cut them down. That's actually what is going to deliver, I think, the future for our industry, and that's what's going to keep us alive. So we don't attack other countries, but we do say pretty loudly, for example, that we're very happy that we've introduced illegal logging legislation in Australia. About 10% of the wood in the world is illegal, and that's about $400 million worth coming into Australia each year that we know has no provenance, and we're quite happy to say in the media that this is something that should be cracked down on because our house is in order. That's how we do it. The mirror message of cracking down on that is, well, we must be okay. And certification's the same, by the way. We're happy to drive certification. Certification is key. Don't mishear me about ISCAS, of course, or about certification. They are absolutely vital in this world we operate in. But we're very happy with that because we've got a completely certified Australian industry, and 90% of the world's forests aren't certified at all. So happy to have those. We're happy to have those sort of conversations because they make the shadow that falls from us looks good. Hope that answered that.
Handle one more if there is one. No? We're all done. Thanks, Ross. Fantastic. Thanks very much.